Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's call, Governance, Changes, and Arab Citizens of Israel. My name is Liron Shoham. I'm director of the Interagency Task Force on Israeli Arab Issues, or IATF. We're delighted to hold this call in partnership with the Israel Policy Forum. We're going to jump right in. Since it was sworn in late December, the government of Israel has sparked significant controversy over its fast-paced efforts to make sweeping changes to Israel's policies and governance. Judicial reforms are in the spotlight as perhaps the most consequential set of changes, but these are only a fraction of the record-breaking some 3,700 bills proposed over the last 5 months. Sometimes this is referred to as a legislative tsunami. Many of these bills focus on Israel's Arab citizens in ways that are raising significant concerns among advocates for civil equality and shared society, both for the direct impact on these issues in the population and for what they indicate about this government's overall intentions regarding the Arab minority. Today, we're delighted to have an opportunity to hear from 3 experts about this wave of legislation and Israeli changes in Israeli governance, its impact on Arab relations and implications for state-minority relations. We have with us Noah Sattath, Executive Director of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, or ACRI, Advocate Abir Joubran from the Arab Minority Rights Department of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and Michael Koplow, Chief Policy Officer of the Israel Policy Forum. Thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us today to discuss this important issue. This call, I'll start with questions for each of our panelists to frame and dive right into the issues, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. My colleagues, Erica Shaps and Hannah Slutsky, are on behind the scenes to monitor the chat, collect your questions on the Q&A function, and support with technical issues. This call is being recorded and will be shared with our members in the coming days. Noah, let's start with you. Thank you for being here. There's such a large number of proposed bills. Very few of them are likely to actually pass due to sheer volume. What can you tell us about how this wave is affecting Arab society already, just for being proposed, and what are the issues at hand?
Thank you, Leon. So thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for hosting this important webinar, and we're delighted to be cooperating with you and with IPF, and thank you to the entire IATF staff for the joint work on this. In terms of the current, you called it the tsunami, we call it the carpet bombing, but it's all describing an emergency and unpleasant experiences. We're seeing a multitude of proposals, and from the very early stages of this government until now, and including the attempts at changing the structure of the regime here in Israel, we're seeing that the main targets of these policies and bills and legislation are Palestinians, both Palestinians in the West Bank and more Palestinians inside Israel. So the entire anti-democratic wave that we're seeing it as mostly targeting Palestinians. Some of it is very clear and apparent in the drafting of the legislation, and some of it is more hidden and more technical, and some of it is just dog whistle in terms of how it's targeting Palestinians in the language of legislation. Abir will dive into the trends that we're seeing, but I think that it's important to speak about the chilling effect and the tagging of Palestinian citizens of Israel as a threat, as enemies, as a minority that requires extra policing or extra security or extra caution. And in that sense, even though the majority of legislation does not even pass the initial stages, the symbolic effects of it are apparent. And that's why we participate in many of these kinds of calls in order to try and negate this effect, and we are very happy to be here and to continue to cooperate.
Well, can you, before we dive into the details, can you expand a little bit? Why are Arab citizens, Palestinian citizens of Israel, such a focus for the legislation? Why do you see why would it be such a central concern for the government?
We're looking for an answer more than they're racist. I think that the general ideology of the parties is of all the parties in the government is somewhat racist to outright Jewish supremacist, and specifically now at this juncture where the government has failed to deliver on the main promise of a regime change or judicial reform, as they call it. They have to appease the base in some other way. And targeting Palestinians who do not enjoy the broad support that the judicial system has is an easy solution. Looks like an easy solution to them.
Thank you. Maybe we'll switch over to Abir and talk about technically what some of these look like, so that maybe beyond the reasons, there's the specifics of what some of this legislation looks like and what it means for trends in Jewish-Arab relations and in support for narrowing gaps for Arab society that have been developing over the last decade and more. Abir, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. In preparing for this call, we talked about three main areas that the legislation can be categorized as covering: identity, land issues, and, as Noah mentioned, police and security. Can you give us some examples of what it looks like and why this is so concerning for Arab society? Can we start with identity and land?
Yeah, I thought it would be, good to have a PowerPoint and to have some of the legislation within us. So identity, I can give the example of the Palestinian flag, raising the Palestinian flag in Israel. The situation today, the legal situation today, that there is no law in Israel that prohibits waving the flag. It's a kind of freedom of political expression that under the Israeli law, it's protected. And it symbolizes also the Arab residents of Israel, which are 20% of the population. This is their identity. Saying that, it doesn't mean that the right is absolute. The police have the power to ban waving the flag if there is high level of probability that waving the flag will cause a severe breach of public police. We have seen over the last few months a lot of proposals targeting waving the flag or having the Palestinian flag. We had a proposal since February 2023 to prohibit waving the flag through the penal law. Also, there was a suggestion for bill in May 2023 to impose a fine on flag barriers. We are talking about 10,000 shekels fine, which is about $2,500 each time you wave a flag. And the most important bill in my eyes is the student law, which was in May 2023, bill banning waving Palestinian flag within the universities, which lead for 30 days of suspicions from the university. And if it's repeated, this event is repeated, then you will have a permanent expulsion from the university and denial a degree. We saw a lot of deans of universities who sent letters asking to remove this bill. Moving to land and housing.
Can we wait a second? Let's dive into the flag is one example of is a strong example of cracking down Palestinian identity. But maybe can you explain a little bit more? From one perspective, it can be seen as a very political symbol. It is a political symbol. Can you help us understand how this is? Why from within Arab society and Palestinian society, it's seen as a curtailment of expression of identity, and how it affects student life, for example, or freedom of expression. How is this received? Some of these bills have passed. Some of these are still pending. Yeah. How is this legislation and the numerous efforts to restrict display of the flag how are they perceived and received by ACRI or within Arab society in Israel about about all the messaging that has been made over the last several years about inclusion, opening the doors to higher education, employment, and middle class, and so forth?
It wasn't easy so far, waving the flag, especially in Jerusalem. We saw the Sheikh Jarrah events and the other places, but especially in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem. The flag is part of our identity. We saw the Palestinian flag standing next to the Israeli flag during the Oslo Accord. It's not only exclusive for the Palestinian community in Israel, but also a lot of Jewish people also raised this flag. We saw that during the demonstration. It's a powerful message about, that in Israel, within Israel, there is also other population, and it's part of our freedom of expression and also our identity as an Arab in this country, and we feel part also of the people within the West Bank, the people of Gaza, people living abroad. I just had the reunion of my family, the Joubran family, that they live in Canada, the States, Ramallah, and the different places. And what unites us is also the Palestinian flag. So it's very important, and it means that there is no freedom of expression once you ban the flag, and there is no reason to do that. It means that there is a ban of freedom of expression for a minority, for a certain community. It means targeting this community, and you have other methods that you can use in order, to keep peace in public place. And I mentioned the police authority to ban waving the flag. So why you want to ban it at all? It's a political decision more than it's being threatened by the Palestinian flag. Having the deans of the universities also sending a clear message that we support freedom of expression. We have different students, and they have the right to express themselves even within the universities. I think this is also a strong message to the government.
Thank you. Since there's so many examples, there are already questions about this that hopefully we'll get to in the Q&A. I want to make sure we get to all the examples, because this is one example of the categories of legislation affecting Palestinian citizens of Israel. So you were gonna talk about land and housing as another.
Yeah, land and housing. It's also a very important issue. I will give two examples. I will make it quick. The admissions committee law, changing in this law. Today, the admission committees are exclusive at the Negev, Naqab, and
Can you explain what the admissions committees are?
The admissions committee, today the law gives the power for communities, Jewish communities, that they have 300 families to have admission committee. That means every new family wants to join the village or the Mushav especially, they have to be accepted by this committee. The law in Israel allowed having these committees in order to keep the differentiation between the different communities and to keep their speciality. Today, the bill is going to there is a new suggestion or amendment for the bill in order to broaden the use of the admission committee for communities up to 700 to 1,000 families. It's a lot. And they are going to do it all over the country, not only in the Galilee or the Negev. The outcome will not affect only the Arab community in Israel as a minority. It will affect also various communities like the Mizrahim, Jewish Mizrahi, people with disabilities, religious, secular Jews, and new immigrants. It will mean that those population will not be able to access towns or villages.
Can you go a little further and explain why this is a particular grievance for Arab society when it comes to housing and the ability to
That means more and more towns will be shut in our faces if we want to move and live in different in small villages or in different towns in Israel.
And this has been an issue in the past.
It was an issue. We ACRI led the Qa'dan case at the Supreme Court, and we had the Supreme Court decision saying that Arab families have the right to move to a Jewish town, and it means that the options within Arab families today who are looking for different future for their children and they want to live in a Jewish community, they will not have the right anymore. If we are talking about a small, not small, 700 is not small community, but medium communities we can call by size.
The law doesn't necessarily mention Arab citizens. It just allows for this kind of selection.
Yeah. Yes, the law doesn't mention, but all the criteria in the law, they targeting the Arab community at the end. So
that is one example that falls into, there's a housing crisis now for a long time in Arab communities where families really don't have necessarily room to grow within most Arab communities, and there's difficulty finding places to live. And we've seen more and more that some people will say, "Oh, are there more mixed cities?" And I've heard it. People will quote say, "Oh, Israel is now a mixed city." The idea that there is pressure to create more housing opportunities for the overcrowded Arab communities and opportunities to live in different areas, perhaps closer to employment as well.
It is, and we see more couples, more young families moving to work, for example, in the center or in the south, and they are looking for good places to live in. And usually the Jewish towns are a target for them. We see that a lot.
With different results.
Yeah.
So let's go to this is one very, very specific example. Let's move on to the second law that you wanted to bring as an example.
Yeah, the second example is Zionism as a guiding principle in government work. This has been an issue in the last month. A lot of opinions, pro and against. That means that the principle or the value of Zionism will overall all the fundamental values. That means if we have a government decision or a law or any kind of a decision, and we have the right of equality and the value of Zionism, the value of Zionism will.
And in this case, the value of Zionism, just to be clear, because it's, in the American Jewish context, Zionism can be considered simply the right of the Jewish people to live in Israel as a sovereign state of the Jewish people. So in this case, can you define what is controversial? What is of concern for the Arab community when you ask for Zionism to be a guiding principle?
Zionism, in my eyes, is in Israel, is everything about preferring the Jewish people over the Arab people in every aspect of life, in education, work, in land and planning, in being accepted to governmental work. It could be everything for me. So once you have that Zionism as a guiding principle in a government work, it means that the Jewish community have a preference already in any government decision even in decision regarding the Palestinians or the Arab in Israel. I will give an example. One of the issues we have been working on at ACRI is the issues of the unrecognized villages. At Negev, we have over 30 communities living in unrecognized villages, Bedouin, and there have been decisions to build 10 townships for the Jewish at Negev. And part of these townships are going to be built on the unrecognized villages, on the Bedouin community. So once you have that Zionism as a guideline, that means these people have to be evacuated in order to let the Jewish resident or citizen of Israel to live over their land. And that contradicts with other government decisions where they said over their years that they want to solve the unrecognized villages problem and to work on planning for these communities. But once you have Zionism, that means you prefer to give the land to the Jewish communities rather than the Bedouin communities.
And I think the language of the legislation was actually specified in land and planning and applied in land and planning.
Among other things, yeah.
Now this bill was tabled for now. It didn't pass and it's theoretically off the table, but can you speak a little bit about what the discourse around it and what the discussion around it, the effect it had on
there has been a lot of discussion about it, and they decided at the end for now because not everyone agreed on it, and we heard call from also the legal advisor of the government about it. So right now they withdraw it from the table because it was. There is a lot of issues regarding this. I don't know if I have the time, but we have the nationality law and we have Supreme Court decisions, and what this Supreme Court decision that say that the nationality law and having the Judaism of the state, it's symbolic. It doesn't change the situation. And now once we have that Zionism as a guideline, a principle, everything is going to change. So right now, because it made a lot of noise within Israel and a lot of discussion, they decided to withdraw it, but we might see it coming in usually in different shapes in the future.
So we're gonna, in about 2 minutes, we'll move on to Michael to zoom out to talk about the overall implications in terms of Israel as a democratic state, but it would not be right for me to move on without inviting you to speak about crime and violence. And I'm sure we'll also get back to that in Q&A, but can you please also tell us how policing and security are being affected by changes in governments are affecting the security of Arab society and
this is a big issue. Thank you for asking, Liron. This is a big issue within the Arab community. I prepared figures in order for you to see how many victims we had over the years. In 2018, we had 71. 2022, we had 116. In 2023, up till now, we have 103 victims. 70% of the people who are killed over the last 4 years were Arab in Israel, were Arab. That's a huge number. There have been, how can I say, the government tried to deal with the situation and they thought that the right thing to do is having two law enforcement system. And there are, I will talk about it briefly. The National Guard, which means that Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, will have his own police in order to control the Arab community, to have governance over the Arab community. He will have a trained force to deal with this situation, a huge amount of budget
So I
right?
just want to jump in and say it is, to me at least, it has been unclear to what extent this is official versus unofficial. I mean, within Arab society, it's very clear that it's expected the National Guard will be used against Arab society and in mixed cities following May 2021.
Yes.
And sometimes we hear quotations saying from the minister saying this is what it's for. It is still unclear to me if this is formally intended for Arab society or not.
It's intended for the Arab society, and also it's intended to fight the crime within other issues, the mixed cities you mentioned, and the special times that we have in Israel between Arab and Jewish. But the idea is that the Jewish will be served by the police and protected by the police, and the Arab will be dealt with the National Guard, which is you know,
and what is
it's treating the Arab as a threat at the end. Adding to this, the having the Shin Bet entering into fighting the crime, investigating, preventing murder, and so on. We heard that. And even the Shin Bet itself said, you know, I don't want to be part of it. And we heard also a government legal advisor saying that it shouldn't be done that way, because the Shin Bet deals usually with terror attacks, with national threats, and having the Shin Bet and the National Guard entering into the Arab society and dealing with even with the crime, it means that the whole Arab society looked at as a threat and as a problematic population. Why is that?
And on one last note, then we'll move on and come back to this later. But what is Arab society seeking when it comes to the high rates of crime and violence?
A very good question, Liron. What we seek is more interfering of the police, more solving cases. I will give a small example. In 2022, only 23% of the crimes were solved, comparing to 70% of the crimes in the Jewish society were solved. That means that the police is not doing its job when it comes to crimes within the Arab community. And also there is a huge gap that due to neglection of the governments over the years in education, dealing with the youth, job opportunities, the bank system that it's hard to get loans, and so on and so on. I think
which feeds crime organizations.
Different ministries need to be involved in order to solve it, and not with power and looking at the Arab community as a threat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. Each one of these areas that you raised could be a webinar series on its own. So thank you for giving us examples. And I know there's, if it's difficult for you on the ground to sort through the wave of legislation, this is just to remind our audiences, this is just select examples of things that are coming through. Michael, thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us. I want to turn it now to you. You write extensively about this government's priorities across the Green Line and implications for Israel as a democratic state. Can you zoom in and talk about how policies and changes in governance related to Arab citizens fit in?
Of course, thank you, Liron. And I'm far and away the least important speaker on this webinar. So I'm happy to I've been happy to listen to Noah and Abir. So I think that Noah talked about some of the difficulties stemming from racism, and I think that certainly does exist. But I think that a lot of this stems from inherent tensions within Zionism, which I certainly do not view Zionism as racism per se. But I think that given that Zionism is and was a Jewish political liberation movement, it has always had problems dealing with a minority in the Jewish state who are not Jewish. And we have a situation where 1 out of every 5 Israelis is not Jewish, and that presents difficulties for Zionism. And I think that we see some of those difficulties certainly coming out when we think about the way in which non-Jewish citizens of Israel deal with the state and deal with society. As you point out, a lot of my work is related to Israeli policies in the West Bank and toward non-citizen Palestinians. And I think that we see a lot of what happens in the West Bank and some of the tactics and strategies that Israel uses in the West Bank creeping into the way that Israel deals with its own Palestinian citizen minority. And we see this in a number of ways, to even if we kind of take the three categories even of identity, land and housing and crime. When it comes to identity, of course, Israel has always had difficulty with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, in terms of how you define them, in terms of even starting with how you talk about the land itself, occupied versus disputed, Palestine versus Judea and Samaria. So, this identity question, of course, is going to, I think, come to bear when it comes to non-Jewish citizens of Israel as well. And, we have seen for a long time crackdowns on Palestinian symbols inside the West Bank and Gaza. As Abir pointed out, we're now seeing it increasingly when it comes to the use of Palestinian flags inside of Israel as well. And part of that is taking the tactics that have long been employed in the West Bank and Gaza and bringing them into Israel proper. And part of it, I think, is Israelis seeing the Palestinian flag hoisted by Palestinian citizens of Israel and thinking that it's not about Palestinian identity, it's about the PLO, or it's about or it's about Palestinian liberation movements. And so, I think that we sort of see this two-way street going on both sides.
When it comes to things like a question, we actually have a question in Q&A about that. Basically asking what does the Palestinian flag symbolize? So I think those questions are very much alive in American Jewish context as well.
Right. When it comes to land and housing, there have long been deep inequities in how Israel treats land and housing for Palestinians in the West Bank and Area C, which is the part of the West Bank, the 60% of the West Bank that is under direct Israeli administrative control. The inequities in terms of permits that are approved for Israeli Jews who live in Area C, and that's where all settlements are located, versus Palestinians who live in Area C are the numbers are staggering. During Prime Minister Netanyahu's first uninterrupted tenure as Prime Minister, so 2009 to 2021, fewer than 100 permits were handed out across those 12 years to Palestinians living in Area C for building. I'm not talking about in any single year, I'm talking about across the 12 years in total. There was not one year in that stretch where double-digit permits were given out. There were some years in that stretch where 0 permits were given out. So, Israel has long made it difficult for Palestinians living in Area C to plan their communities, to build. There are also something between 11,000 and 12,000 Palestinian structures in Area C that are today under active demolition orders because they were built without permits. And so, again, we see some of this creeping into Israel proper, where, the situation is certainly not nearly as bad as it is in Area C for Palestinians, but we do see deep divides and deep inequities in, particularly when it comes to things like planning and master plans for Palestinian municipalities inside of Israel versus Jewish municipalities inside of Israel. And so, again, we see some of these things that we see in the West Bank bleeding over into Israel. And, when it comes to crime, particularly over the last couple of weeks, as there has been this debate about whether the Shin Bet is going to be involved in investigating crimes exclusively in Arab towns and villages inside of Israel, this again is drawn directly from the West Bank, where the Shin Bet mostly operates, and there the Shin Bet operates largely against Palestinians, not exclusively. There are units dedicated to Jewish terrorism, but most of what the Shin Bet does is deter terrorism from Palestinians inside the West Bank, and to be very active inside of Palestinian towns, villages, and society. And now we're seeing this idea that just as the Shin Bet operates in the West Bank almost exclusively against Palestinians, that it should be brought into Israel proper, in this case, to operate exclusively against crime coming from Arab citizens of Israel. And so, it shouldn't be a surprise, I think, to people that when you have 56 years of an Israeli military administration and occupation inside the West Bank, that many of the tactics and strategies that have been employed are going to come back over across the Green Line into Israel. And I do want to say something about kind of how this relates to Israeli democracy and also to the situation here in the United States. As it relates to Israeli democracy has always had challenges. Arab citizens of Israel were living under military administration. I'm talking about Arab citizens inside the Green Line up until 1966. No democracy is perfect. Certainly the United States is not a perfect democracy. While this was taking place inside of Israel, in the United States, we still had Jim Crow. So I think that, we are used to democracies experiencing all sorts of challenges. It doesn't make Israel a non-democracy, but it certainly raises real questions about the quality of Israeli democracy. And I'd say in particular, questions about whether Israel is actively seeking to improve the situation. Because, as I said, every democracy has its challenges, but unfortunately, much of what we're seeing now seems like less of an attempt to address some of the inequities than an attempt to deepen them. And I think that that's where these questions come in about democracy. Zionism is going to be challenging toward non-Jewish citizens of Israel. It's always going to be challenging for non-Jewish citizens of Israel to deal with Hatikva, which talks about the Jewish yearning to return to the land. It's always going to be challenging for non-Jewish citizens of Israel to relate to the flag that has a Magen David, an explicitly Jewish star. Now, I don't think that means that the symbols of the state have to be upended or completely, completely done away with. I think that there are good suggestions for how to rectify these things. But I think that what we always want to see in Israel and in any democracy is an effort towards working towards rectifying these things. And at the moment, unfortunately, it's more difficult to see that happening than to see the reverse.
I just want to jump in and say, I think that one of the trends that characterized the last 10 or 15 years in Israel was a push to narrow socioeconomic gaps, create more equal opportunities for Arab citizens. And there was this sense that real desire and momentum around improving civil equality, whether for democratic purposes or for economic purposes or for social cohesion. And so I would love you to finish your point, to complete your point, but I want to then open it up for all three of you to talk about how is this government change? How is this a change in Israeli governance as opposed to business as usual? If we go back to 1965, then we can say it's always been and it always will be a real problem. But park that for a minute, and Michael, please continue.
Yeah, and just on that note, the last government we had the first ever independent Arab party joining a coalition under Mansour Abbas and Ra'am. We do not have that. We do not have that now. But I think part of the difficulty is also that in the previous government we saw real steps, a real stride, not only just with Ra'am's inclusion, but in terms of increased budgets to the Israeli Arab sector. And much of that has been rolled back, and I think that in many ways you see it most in terms of these crime numbers in the Arab sector, which are now already almost as high this year as they were for the entirety of last year. And then lastly, just quickly something about the U.S. Jewish community and how this impacts the discourse here. American Jews like to talk a lot about the ways in which non-Jewish citizens of Israel are integrated into Israel. It's one of the most potent arguments you hear from American Jews about why Israel is not an apartheid state. And I'll just say that I agree with that sentiment, that Israel is not an apartheid state. And much of it has to do with the fact that you do have Palestinians who are citizens and serve in the Knesset and have served on the Supreme Court, and we all know the litany. I think for American Jews in particular, because this argument is so strong and so potent, and you see it everywhere, and you see so much programming and discourse about things like shared society and things like equality. I think it's even more important to be on top of these issues, be aware of the ways in which these inequities and discrimination do exist, and frankly, to push our Israeli colleagues and partners and friends on these issues, because first and foremost, it is about the lived lives of Palestinian citizens of Israel, but for American Jews as well, who want to support Israel, want to support Israel as a Jewish state, and also want to support Israel as a democracy. If we want to fight for the vision of Zionism in which we believe, that has to include better treatment for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and it has to include letting Israelis know that our vision is one of greater equality and of reducing these inequities. So I think it's critically important, as I said, first and foremost for the people whose lives this actually impacts, but I think for American Jews as well, given our own relationship with Israel.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I know I could keep asking you questions, but I'm going to be democratic and pull questions from the Q&A. We have one going back to crime, asking if the government of Israel today distinguishes Arab organized crime as a threat or Arab society as a threat.
Can answer that.
I think that the bills that we see are meant to target the entire Palestinian society as a threat, and they're using the crisis of crime and security that we see in Arab society as a way to justify it.
Good answer.
Abir, anything to add?
Well, no, I said exactly what I wanted to say.
All right.
Yeah.
People feel free, please, to follow up on chat or Q&A to these questions. There's a question all the way looking now at political partnerships, asking how the panelists feel about prospects for new Jewish Arab political parties. There's one, Kol Ezrachea, all citizens as an engine for democracy and equality. We haven't spoken about the political track. Do you have?
Actually, one of the major threats that we have mapped from this government, which has not come up yet, is the issue of the political representation of Palestinian citizens of Israel, in the sense that this government comes on the following over a decade of delegitimization of political representation by of Arab society in Israel, and incitement campaigns against some of the Arab parties or all of the Arab parties. And in the coalition agreements, there are agreements on changes to the basic law of the Knesset that regulates the voting that would facilitate disqualifying Arab parties from running. And these bills have not yet been advanced, which is a great relief, but certainly ACRI is watching very closely, and these could still happen, probably not in this Knesset session, but in future Knesset sessions and as we move closer to elections.
I can jump in on the question as well. I think that having joint Jewish Arab parties, it is great, would be great. The more Jewish and Arab political participation there is, I think the better off Israel will be, and the better off Israeli politics will be. But I also think that in some ways that is kind of skipping over the first step, which is making it more routine to have Arab parties included in coalitions. And we've had this happen once. I think it was a good example, certainly not a perfect one, but a good example of Jews and Jewish parties and Arab parties working together, serving in the same coalition, being able to agree on some of the same priorities. And at the time, I think a lot of folks saw this happen and said, the seal is broken. This is going to be kind of routine from now on. I'll say that at the time I was more pessimistic. I didn't like being more pessimistic, but I was more pessimistic that it wasn't necessarily going to mean a change going forward. And I think that it's important for it to happen again soon, because if the next government or the following government is one where you have a coalition that has Jewish and Arab parties included, and certainly Mansour Abbas has been very clear and open about his desire to serve in a government headed by either the right or the left, then that's how you will make this more routine and normalized and legitimized across Israeli society. It won't come as a surprise to anybody who regularly reads me or listens to me that I have deep issues with the current Israeli government and with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Notwithstanding that, I think in many ways the best thing that could happen for Jewish and Arab participation, joint participation in Israeli politics, would be for there to be a right-wing government that included an Arab party. Because I think that if you had a government headed by Prime Minister Netanyahu or anyone from Likud or one of the right-wing parties that included Ra'am, it would be much more difficult for Israelis on the right to view this as something illegitimate. And lastly, I'll say that many of the people who are interested in joint Israeli parties that are Jewish and Arab, are coming at it from a point of coexistence. But I do worry sometimes about a message being sent that an Arab party is only legitimate if it includes Jews as well. And so I think joint Jewish Arab parties are great, but I also would love to see Arab parties normalized and accepted by Israeli Jews kind of on their own terms, where they can have a party that isn't necessarily a party that has Jewish members of Knesset, and have this, as I said, actually be routine going forward, and be the rule, not the exception.
I was gonna, the question that came to my mind, because I'm supposed to be letting other questions come through, is whether this government has made it less likely for Arab participation in coalitions, and that actually is similar, but not exactly the same as a question that came in. How do you perceive the government's actions today and pronouncements on both Arab and Jewish citizens' view of shared society and democracy? In a sense, is the intense change in governance perhaps creating a backlash, greater interest in maintaining and continuing working for a shared society, or is it having, or is it polarizing the population? Do you have any indications, anecdotal or not, about this? No, I see you. I see you.
I actually don't have any information. I think that there is a great split between Jewish society and Arab society. In the Jewish society focus on prevention of the damage to the democratic institutions in Israel, and the Palestinian society feeling excluded from these demonstrations because of the national symbols, and refraining from these demonstrations because the democratic institutions of Israel have not served the equality of Palestinians in great ways as it has Jewish minorities. So I think that there's a huge split there. However, I think that the increased democratic participation in Jewish society will have a positive impact on these questions as well. I mean, I think that the waking up of the supporters of democracy in Israel will ultimately lead also to more engagement in these questions.
But between the lines of what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that perhaps the field of shared society is how fragile the field of shared society actually is when you look at the big controversy raised by the government and how differently it's perceived between Arab society and the most of the people protesting, and the challenge of bringing those together maybe is an indicator of that fragility.
Exactly.
I would add one small thing. I think the challenge is having the Arab community flags work together. I mean, Ra'am and Al-Jabha and other parties to work together, because there is also within the Arab community, there is a lot of difference between the different opinion, and also to work well with the left-wing parties. This is also a challenge, having a party that having Jewish and Arab together, it's a blessed thing, but always we will have a different opinions, opposed opinions, and it's hard to agree on everything due to the circumstances. But at least in the NGOs, we have Arab and Jewish working together on a critical issue that we face with this government. So at least there is a relief here.
I'll add something to that. One of ACRI's major supporters in Israel is a psychiatrist. And he asked for a meeting with me, and he told me that now our work is the same, which was surprising to me. And then he explained that people who experience a big mental health crisis, anxiety or depression, they come to him and they seek immediate relief. They just want to go back to the way things were before the crisis happened. And he has a difficult job of telling them, you can't go back. The only way forward is for you to face the big issues that you've been avoiding and suppressing. That's the only way out of the situation. And I think we're at this critical moment in the demonstrations of some of them being very nostalgic and wanting to go back. And our role as a civil society is to say, the only way for us to really even salvage the democratic structures that we have is to develop a larger democratic vision that includes Palestinian society. It includes the crisis with that the Mizrahi Jews are feeling towards the democratic systems. So the only way back is forward and with a larger vision. And that's really the delicate role of dealing with the current demonstrations is.
There's a question in the Q&A about the role of American Jews in this striving to look forward. American Jews have been extremely animated and rightfully so by the developments in Israel, and not only struggling to navigate the complexity, but definitely once you put in Arab citizens and majority-minority relations in Israel, it becomes that much more complex in Israel and for American Jews. What should American Jews do? Know what is the potential role is the question, and in general and specifically about the rising crime rates in Arab communities, because that is the short-term crisis that can't really be left for the long haul. Abir and Michael. Abir, do you want to speak about what American
question
crime?
I think that the American Jews have a lot of power in order to impact Israel and the Israeli government. Their voice is, I think, very important to ask questions about the crimes in the Arab community, to support the organization working on those issues, to write about it. You know, even in the news, in the Israeli news, in Hebrew, because I go to the Hebrew, I go to the Arab news, the crime wasn't reported in the Jewish media. The local media I'm talking about, it started to be reported widely only in the last 2 weeks due to the killing in Nazareth of and then we started to hear about the crime. So I think the more you talk about it, the more you ask questions to the Israeli government, to the local community, it's very important to ask for statistics. You know, we didn't have the numbers even. The NGOs collected the numbers of the people who were murdered, and the statistics are very important, how Israel is dealing with the situation, why they are not solving the crimes and doing why the police doesn't do its job. I think it's crucial and important to raise it.
I wonder
you
if
have-
there's a role for American Jews to talk about the fact that, you know, this crime is not a new issue, and there were government plans and real efforts to begin developing a robust government and in partnership with civil society and the police to address root causes of crime. And I think the legislation and the agreements you laid out in your slide look very little like the plan that was approved and implemented and begun to implement last year. That's GR 549 with a 2 billion shekel plan.
On the optimistic side of this, I want to say that the American government has been remarkably effective beyond any expectations, both in the prevention of escalation during Ramadan and in being very vocal about the damage to the democratic institutions. And I think that that is very much due to the space that the support of the American Jewish community gives the administration to be very active on these issues. So I think that if we start, if the IATF and other members start highlighting this as a crisis that the American government needs to relate to, that could have a far-reaching effect on the priority that the Israeli government gives to this, both in the long-term answers in terms of banking and planning, and in the short-term answers of providing more good police resources to solve crimes and address the crime issue, which is not a big mystery. Every single person knows, you know, in Arab society knows where the problem is. It's about dealing with it.
The last question, since you, ACRI is an NGO working in Israel, and so much of the work that we see that IATF relies on for understanding the waves of legislation comes from the work of NGOs who are either implementing government budgets or monitoring the legislation and also reflecting and gathering the experience and needs of Arab society on the ground. How, until this new government, we were talking a lot about growing cooperation between government and NGOs in addressing major issues in Arab society. How, let's end on this, because I think this is also an opportunity for, this is where American Jews also meet Israel through the civil sector. How has the new government affected the ecosystem and the context for NGOs working to promote whether civil equality, shared society, or a question in the Q&A about human rights? No, I really think that's for you.
So I'm thinking about the Knesset hearing that I listened to yesterday about the joint summer camp for bereaved families, Israeli and Palestinian, and there were ministers in the room that said, "We will come and blow up the camp. We will close it down. We will shut it down. We'll bring 10 people and we will shut it down." And the violent language against NGOs and shared society is at levels where it has never been in the past. I mean, it's in such high levels that actually shared society is getting more support. I mean, the violence of the government is the story, and shared society is now being embraced where it hasn't been embraced in the past. But I think that as part of the attack on democratic institutions, there's an attack on civil society. And that's also very, very common in all populist regimes, the attack on civil society. So on the one hand, we're seeing more support, and on the other hand, we're seeing many more attacks. And this is the spirit of our polarized times, where we're seeing both a great democratic hope and uprising and participation, and on the other side, we're seeing unprecedented attacks and violent language. And this And as we're seeing so much cooperation on the anti-democratic side, in terms of both messaging and methods, it is so important for us who are on the democratic side to be cooperating and coordinating and working together.
What I apologize to everyone because I lost track of time. We're after 1, so I want to say this is or 8 p.m. Israel time. This is an amazing note to end on in terms of American Jews really continuing to be aware of the issues related to Arab society, the opportunity that presents for democratic cooperation and for both the short-term attention to these needs and the long-term development of new trends. I apologize that I didn't have time for closing words from each of you, but I thank you so much for. I think there's no conclusion right now at these times. I thank you all for your time, and we'll be sharing a recording of this webinar in the coming days, and hopefully we'll be able to see you again for your insights and have more developments to share.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you
joining
having
us.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you all for your time.